You just got to set a schedule. Then you write a piece. It's going to be painful. Then get somebody to look at it and edit it. Then you set a reminder on your phone. Next week, the same time, you're going to do it again. Doesn't matter what you feel like a week from now. When next week rolls around, you have to do it again.
I'm Ed Marsh, host of the Industrial Growth Institute podcast, and today I'm joined by Jared Dillian. Jared is the founder and principal of Armington Capital LLC, which is a registered commodity trading advisor. He's the editor of the Daily Dirt Nap, a daily market newsletter for investment professionals that's been continuously published since 2008. But there's a lot more to his background. He's a 96 graduate of the United States Coast Guard Academy. He got a BS in mathematics and computer sciences, and then he built on that with an MBA from University of San Francisco with a concentration in finance some years after that, and then recently with a Master's of Fine Arts in Writing from Savannah College of Art and Design. So kind of a Renaissance guy. After the Coast Guard, Jared worked for a small floor market maker on the Pacific Options Exchange, and then as a trader for Lehmen Brothers from 2001 to 2008. Specializing in, there's a technical term, we'll have to ask him about it, index arbitrage and ETF trading. The reason we're talking today, though, is a lot about his content creation. And to that end, he's written 5 books across several different genres. Street Freak, subtitled Money and Madness at Lehmen Brothers, was named Business Week's #1 general business book of 2011. He followed that with a novel, All the Evil in This World, that we'll talk about a little bit, that he published in 2016. A book called Those Bastards, 69 Essays on Life, Creativity, and Meaning, followed in 2023. No Worries, How to Lead a Stress-Free Financial Life, early this year or late last year. And then coming out shortly, Night Moves and Other Stories, a collection of short stories going to be published in the next several weeks. Jared is an adjunct professor in the business program at Coastal Carolina University. He's got multiple frequent media appearances on MSNBC, Fox Business, Bloomberg TV, NPR, New York Times, LA Times, Business Insider, Yahoo Finance, Market Watch, and more. And so the logical question for folks that listen to this podcast and think of it as the Industrial Growth Institute podcast that works with middle market industrial manufacturers on revenue growth is, sounds like an interesting guy, but why is he here? How does this fit? So first, I like to speak periodically with veterans because I think their message often transcends industry. But second, because obviously, as you can tell from his bio, Jared is a huge content creator. And one of the massive barriers that industrial companies have in revenue growth is their ability to create content. So I'm hoping we're going to learn a lot today from Jared about how he fell into that, how he developed that, how he built that muscle, how he grinds it out and all that kind of stuff. So I'd say buckle up. Be sure to give the show a like and drop a comment while you're listening. I think it's going to be fascinating. So after that long introduction, welcome, Jared.
Hey, thanks for having me. That was a great bio. I really appreciate it.
Well, it's an impressive background, and I appreciate your smiling. I think I've watched you a number of times. We chatted in person. You're not a smiley guy, so we'll see if we can get another smile out of you along the way here today. Let me start. I touched on it, but I want to lay out your routine work obligations, because I think this gives us a great context. So daily, you've got Daily Dirt Nap. You send that newsletter every morning. You also you run a new business, Armington Capital. You've got weekly a free Jared Dillian letter. You've got a weekly radio show. You've got weekly obligations as an adjunct professor. You do a weekly episode of the Be Smart podcast. You write on Substack consistently. And then monthly, you've got a strategic portfolio newsletter around ETFs, and you've got your Street Freak newsletter. That's the stuff that happens kind of on a regular tempo, but you travel frequently. You've got several online courses that you built and administer. You're a DJ and have periodic gigs in New York and Florida and other places. You organize and run an annual finance conference, and you've got your second book release coming up inside a year. And so I'm probably missing a couple things. Fill in the blanks.
No, I think you got everything. Yeah.
All right. So how do you manage all that?
Well, number one is I don't have any kids, right? So I have 7 cats. Those are my kids. But I'm not spending my weekends going to little kid birthday parties. I'm not, driving back and forth to activities. Like I don't have to do any of that stuff. So that's how I cheat, right? Like I cheat because I don't have any kids.
But you're running
But
two businesses, your publishing business and your Armington Capital business.
yeah, I mean, really, I just like I don't have an off switch. Like I do sit on the couch and watch TV, right? Like I'm a big baseball fan. So for 6 months out of the year, every night, 7 o'clock, I'm on the couch and I'm watching the Yankees. I'm a big Yankees fan. But I have my laptop on my lap. So I'm not really watching the game. I'm listening. I'm listening and I'm working as I listen. So lately my new project is, if you can recall, I wrote the bond masterclass like 5 or 6 years ago.
Right.
I'm working on an options masterclass. Okay. So I've been sitting in front of the TV working on this options masterclass, which is going to be about 20 or 25,000 words. And it's going to take me, 3 or 4 weeks to do it. Um, but, when I'm relaxing, I'm also working, right? And I also, like, I take time to actually relax. So I'm in a new house. We built a new house, and the new house has a library. And we bought this sheepskin restoration hardware sheds to put in the library. And like I literally put on my list of things to do, read a book, right? So for 45 minutes, I'll go in the library and I'll lay down in the sheds and I'll read a book. Like I'll make sure that I make time to do that, right? But my day, I have to make time to exercise, right? After we get off this podcast, I'm gonna go get on my treadmill. There's a TV in front of the treadmill. I watch Bloomberg TV while I work out so I can watch the markets. Like that's what I do. Like I'm always doing stuff, always.
So how many hours a day are you working?
I mean, unless I'm like eating or sleeping, like pretty much constantly.
So 5 in the morning till 9 at night?
I sleep a lot. I don't get up until about 6:30 or 7. So
Okay.
yeah.
And then you jump right in.
Yep.
All right, we're going to jump around a little bit in this conversation. Some of it is my naivete about the background of what you do. Some is wanting to pull on some threads. But let's start Armington Capital, a registered commodity trading advisor. For those of us who aren't in finance, what exactly does that mean?
A commodity trade. The best way I can describe it for the lay person is it's a little bit like a hedge fund that lives in the futures world instead of the stocks world, right? And the structure is very different. It's not a GP/LP structure like a hedge fund. It's a very different structure. But essentially, yes, I am managing money, and I started doing this, I guess, about 6 or 7 weeks ago, right? And it is a huge amount of fun. I absolutely love it. So.
But I would think also an additional stressor, because now you're not just on the hook for your opinions, you're on the hook for your results, right?
That is absolutely true. And the markets I look at are open usually 23 hours a day. Whether it's stocks or bonds or oil or agricultural commodities or soft commodities, like these commodities trade around the clock. And really the only time they're closed is from 5 to 6 p.m. Eastern time. And, at 6 p.m., I'm usually at dinner and I have my phone and I get to see where everything opens. It's my life has totally changed since I started this business. I was a market junkie before, but now I am always watching the markets no matter what I'm doing. Right.
So that owning accountability for the results feels to me like something that probably was fostered through the Coast Guard Academy in your time in the service. Did you have that naturally? Did you rebel against it? Did you embrace it? Do you see, as I do, that there's a lack of accountability in much of society these days?
And it's kind of a philosophical question. So, I think I actually developed it before I got to the Coast Guard Academy. I think I developed it when I was in high school.
Okay.
And I was in marching band in high school, and we had a very tough band director. and I was drum major under him, and I was a very tough drum major. And the discipline that I learned in marching band carried over into the Coast Guard.
Okay.
That sense of accountability that you're talking about. Um, it's funny. Like I teach school, like you said, I teach at the university, and it's actually uncommon that I run into a student that is unaccountable for their
Really?
own behavior. It's pretty uncommon. I taught last year. I had one last year who was kind of a weasel and was trying to get out of doing stuff, but it's pretty rare. Like I don't. My experience with teaching kids is not we're all doomed. Like this generation sucks. Like we're just totally screwed. That's not my experience at all. They're actually very conscientious. Um, so what they are not is they're not risk takers. That I think is the difference from
Okay.
generation to generation. They are not risk takers at all. But they're nice kids and they're conscientious and I think they're accountable.
Oh, it's good to hear. I wonder if Gen Z, I guess you're teaching Gen Z
Gen
now,
Z,
and I wonder
yeah.
if there's kind of Neil Howe that we both have listened to through John Malden's program certainly talks about the changes in generations, and I wonder if that's a change. Maybe Gen Z is more accountable.
Yeah. I think I think the pandemic had an effect too.
Yeah, for sure.
I think yeah, it's kind of a long story, but we are 4.5 years past the pandemic now, and that's in the past. And I think if kids had any bad habits during the pandemic, I think they've unlearned them by this point. So, but Neil Howe does. I mean, he does great work with his generational studies. I'm super into that.
Yeah, it's
And
fascinating stuff.
I'm a Gen Xer. Like I was born right in the middle of Gen X, like the absolute middle. Like I'm a pure Gen Xer.
So we're going to talk about that a little bit later, and whether any of that attitude has infused your writing. But let's back up to this content creation. You write across genre. You've done educationally, you've done fiction, you've done short stories, you've done a variety of stuff. You also do audio, you do video, you create courses, you create a lot of music. So a lot of different kinds of content creation. Is there a commonality? Do you see some of it as your vocation and some as an avocation? Is some a hobby, is some for pleasure, or do you just enjoy creating across all of those?
I do, but I will say that my financial content usually sells better than my non-financial content. So the financial content pays the bills,
Mm-hmm.
and it allows me to do what I really enjoy. So you mentioned my short story collection, Night Moves. So today we're recording this on September 16th. It's coming out next Monday, September 23rd. I've always wanted to write short stories. This is, by the way, so my first 5 books, the first one was a memoir, the second one was a novel, the third one was an essay collection, the fourth one was trade nonfiction, and this one is a short story collection. Those 5 genres done for somebody's first 5 books, it's never happened. I'm the first person in history to do it.
Okay, so is
So
poetry next or what?
probably not. I think I'm going to stop there.
Okay.
But no, literally in history, it has never been done. So I am a very versatile writer. I can do a lot of different things. And like I said, the financial books, I seem to do that best. But it's not that I don't enjoy it. I do enjoy it, but it's not my true love.
Is
So
there any of it that you really have to sweat and grind out, or does it all flow the same?
no, it's all about the same. I mean, I don't like doing research. Like when I start having to do research for a book, then it sucks. I hate doing research. Um, but that's really the only thing I dislike.
Do you believe that people have a creative gene, or do you believe that anybody, if they put their mind to it and invest the energy, can become creative?
Uh, that's a good question. Um, I think everybody has something to contribute, right? I think everybody has something to contribute, but most people are not in the habit of contributing, right? They've never done it before,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like if you gave everybody in the world a Substack account, like everybody would have something interesting to say. Like assuming they were good at communication, assuming they were a good writer, like people have something interesting to say. But it is the discipline which we talked about earlier. It is the discipline of creating something day after day, week after week that people find difficult. Like, it's funny. I was there's this other blogger. His name is Phil Back. He's also in the financial industry, and he does a lot of stuff with REITs, and he has a blog. And he'll go for like a month or two without posting. And he says to me, he's like, how do you do this every day? And I told him, I'm like, I am a newspaper man. Like, I have a daily deadline, right? So if you set a daily deadline, you can do it, right? It's all about discipline.
Did you sense the creativity in yourself when you were younger, or is this something that flourished after you left the Coast Guard and were thinking about leaving the finance world?
No, I mean, I was doing creative writing in high school, and I was even doing it at the Coast Guard Academy too. Um, the Coast Guard Academy has an alumni bulletin, and my senior year, I was actually a guest columnist for my entire senior year. So I've always been a writer and a musician. Like I've been doing this my entire life. So
Got it. Authenticity is mentioned on your website about who you are, but it also comes through in so much of your content and your creativity. I see it every day in the Daily Dirt Nap. You talk about your emotional connection and your journey with your 7 cats, about your experience as a drum major in high school and your support for the program going on an ongoing basis, buying them uniforms. You talk about battling your weight. You have shared your annual income. You speak and write a lot about mental health in the finance world. Did you make a conscious decision along the way to infuse your writing with this authenticity, or was it just a natural way that you started writing?
well, um, it's it's what I've always done. It's the way I've always written. Having said that, um, I read a lot of financial newsletters before I started my own. And what I noticed about the really successful newsletters is that the newsletter author tended to write about autobiographical stuff a lot. They would talk about their family, they talk about their pets, they talk about their trips. And in doing so, you kind of form a bond with the reader. You know what I mean? Like, one thing that happens to me all the time is I'll meet one of my subscribers for the first time and they're like, well, I know all about you, but you don't know anything about me. And which is true, right? Like, because I'm, constantly writing about what I'm doing.
Right.
But, um, the newsletters that are not successful are the ones that strictly stick to the markets. It's all about business and it's super boring and like so what's interesting is that I have subscribers periodically that will email me and they'll be like, enough of the cat stuff, enough of the book stuff, I don't want to hear about it. And I'm like, thank you for your feedback, and I'll just leave it at that, because what I know is that the vast majority of people actually enjoy that stuff. And it's also part of like my philosophy in general is that I just don't take myself that seriously, and I don't think other people should take themselves that seriously. So mixed in with some business is also some fun. I think that's a good thing, some humor.
Mm-hmm.
And if you don't have a sense of humor, get lost. Like, I really don't want you as a subscriber. So
And how much you sometimes write about Zen and how Zen kind of fires you up. If you went without Zen for a week, would your writing be the same, or is there an impact from having that rush?
I have been writing under the influence of nicotine for 20 years.
Okay.
So I used to before Zen, I used to dip, and I wrote my first book, Street Freak, under the influence of nicotine. I've written all my books under the influence of nicotine. Nicotine helps me crystallize my thoughts. It helps me think. It's an incredible drug, And Zyn has been just an incredible innovation because now I can have the nicotine without the cancer. Like I don't have the tobacco. So, I take so many nicotine pouches. I say that I actually give nicotine to the pouches now. like I have so much in my bloodstream. So, and it's funny because I forgot to bring the Zyn in here for this podcast, and it's out in the other room, and I'm kind of like jonesing for it. So.
Uh-oh. I sorry to bring it up that it make you think about it. So when you think about financial writing style, Morgan Housel certainly is known for his impact. What do you think, if as you read his work, why do you think he has such an impact on people?
So I've met Morgan, and I met him at a Stansbury conference in Las Vegas, and I saw his presentation. He had a very good presentation, and I talked to him for about an hour in the green room. And this was about 4 months before No Worries came out, and I was asking him for advice. And I said, "Look, I want this to be like Psychology of Money. I want this to be a huge success." And honestly, I don't remember what advice he gave me. Um, you know, he it's a good Psychology of Money is a great book. I will say that it's an inoffensive book. Okay. It's not, it doesn't say anything that's going to piss people off, where I am constantly saying things that piss people off.
Is that intentional, or is that just because that's your opinion, you don't care what they think?
It's just my opinion.
So you're not trying to needle people to get
No,
engagement?
no,
Okay.
I just have strong opinions.
All right.
So, Morgan Housel also got a review from Jason Zweig in the Wall Street Journal the week that it was published, and which gave a huge boost to the book. No Worries, outside of podcasts, which I did a ton of. I did about 70 or 80 podcasts, but outside of podcasts, got really no publicity in the mainstream media. No newspapers, no TV shows, no nothing. I thought that it was a book that deserved some attention from the mainstream media. The mainstream media did a great job covering it with a pillow until it stopped moving.
All right, so let's talk about that book for a minute. In No Worries, you really challenge common wisdom. This stuff, this refrain that we hear about how that $5 cup of coffee every day adds up to $1,300 a year, and that could be an extra mortgage payment. And if you did that, it would shorten your mortgage duration from 30 to 20 years. And so that coffee is really expensive. You contend instead that the little stuff doesn't make such a big difference, but it can make you miserable. And instead, there's a few big choices that matter: student loans, automobile, and mortgage, if I remember correctly. Is that the essence of it?
That is the essence of it. Yep.
And so, kind of give people a quick synopsis of your best advice from a personal finance perspective, building on that.
Well, so like you said, it's not the little things that matter; it's the big things. It's the house, the car, and the student loans. And I look at everything from a framework of financial stress, right? And I'm teaching a personal finance class right now, and I'm saying, look, really, the goal of this class is to be happy. I'm like, out of a class of 30 kids, only one of them is going to end up in the top tax bracket, just statistically speaking. There's only going to have one that makes $650,000 a year. Okay. But they can all be happy with their personal financial situation, and you are happy when you reduce or eliminate your financial stress. And the sources of financial stress always are debt and risk. If you minimize your debt, if you minimize your risk, you will be happy with your financial situation. I mean, me personally, I took out a lot of debt to buy this house. It stresses me out. I still owe a little over $2 million. And I don't like having the debt. Like, I want to pay it off as quickly as possible. I will be very happy once this house is paid for.
But you're not willing to forego Zyn to make an extra mortgage payment every
No,
year.
absolutely not. Like, I'm going to keep using the Zyn, right? Because, like, if you think about it, so Zyn is like $5 a can, and I have I'm basically at a can a day, so which is like $1,700 a year.
Right.
$1,700 a year is like 1/10 of my mortgage payment, right? So like, what is the point of giving up Zen? It is a rounding error. You know what I mean? So
All right. So you talk or write. I think characterize it as cyclically about mental health in the finance world. There's some periods where you reference it frequently. There's some where you don't that much. On the one hand, as you said, you're Gen X, which I assume kind of I'm early Gen X, you're mid Gen X, but I think of people think of us as being kind of callous renegades in many ways. On the other hand, there's your focus on mental health, and lately there's all these stories in the news about investment banking and interns working 80 hours a week and stuff like that. Your book, All the Evil, dug into drugs and debauchery and in trading firms and that lifestyle. How do we balance the need to be tough and resilient and determined and persistent and to push through the crap that's inherent in life while also being realistic about self-care or appropriate leadership?
yeah, so I have bipolar disorder. I was diagnosed about 20 years ago when I was at Lehmen, and um, you talk about being tough. In the seven, if you don't count when I was hospitalized, right, because of my illness, if you go the 7 years that I worked at Lehmen Brothers, I only took 9 days off
Wow.
in 7 years, right? So the whole time I'm experiencing these symptoms, whether it's, mood swings or psychosis or depression or whatever, I did not take time off. I showed up to work and pushed through it, right? Until it got to the point that I really could not handle it, and then I asked for help, you know. And if you read the book, if you read Street Freak, I was on the trading floor one day and I just walked off the floor. I looked up a psychiatrist online. I walked to her office and then I got checked into the hospital. But I there you have to work through it. Yeah,
Do you still work through it on a regular basis?
I mean, things are so much better. Things are so much better. My blog, We're Gonna Get Those Bastards, a Substack, is I would say the last 2 years, I've been writing about how to be mentally and psychologically healthy, right? Um, I've done a whole bunch of different posts on that. And really what that is because that's what I've worked so hard on for the last 20 years is trying to be mentally and psychologically fit, right? Um, if you want help on how to be a triathlon runner, then go talk to David Goggins. But if you want help learning how to be happy, how to be like deeply content and deeply happy, spiritually happy, then talk to me because I have the answer. Because I've been working on it really, really hard for 20 years. So
And in a few words, what is the answer?
There's no few words. There's millions of words, but no few words.
All right. So the blog again to refer people to, it's your Substack, and what is it?
We're gonna get those bastards. But also, my next book after Night Moves is going to be called Rule 62: Meditations on Success and Spirituality, and you're going to be able to read about it all in there. So that's my next book that should come out in about a year. So
Got it. How many days a week do you really have to push through a barrier to get your newsletter written?
um, really, the only time that happens is if it's like Thanksgiving week and the market is moving like 10 basis points a day and there's no news, and then then I'm basically like writing stories about girlfriends in high school and like and stuff like that, because I just there time in the market is not linear. Okay, this is a very important point. And time in general is not linear, but especially time in the market is not linear. Like, there are times in the markets where time expands and minutes feel like days, right? In times of crisis, like we had 6 weeks ago with that yen
Right.
carry trade thing, right? Like the VIX went to 62 and the market crashed and all this stuff. But minutes feel like days. And then there's times in the market where nothing happens, like during that whole grind higher last year, and days feel like minutes, right? So time is not linear. And the problem with the newsletter is linear. I write 3 pages a day, whether it's busy or it's slow or whatever. And honestly, if what I really should be doing is writing 10 pages when there's a lot of stuff going on and just skipping days when there's nothing going on, but people like that regular 3 pages a day.
Right.
But it's a linear publication in a nonlinear world.
So if I'm hearing you correctly, as long as there's activity or stuff happening in the market, that provides you kind of fuel and topics that you can write on. It's when there isn't that that availability of topics that are being generated automatically by the market that you struggle.
That's right. Yeah.
All right. So if we're trying to extrapolate from your insight and your experience to the life of a typical middle market industrial manufacturing CEO, for whom those periods of intensity are less frequent than in the markets, where often it's those very long durations of relatively stable stuff, how would they go about creating the mindset of being able to recognize important topics? Do you have any recommendations?
Would you say that there's periods of boredom?
Yeah, I mean, I think when you're managing people and managing supply chains, there's always hassle. So it's not like you can just sit back and there's nothing going on. But I think, yes, boredom probably is an appropriate term.
Okay. So let me just bounce off of that for a second. And let me say that boredom is one of the worst things in the world, right? Boredom, when you're bored, you're complacent, right? You're complacent about risks, you're complacent about things that can go wrong, you're not looking for ways things can go wrong, and you're also not being proactive and working on projects that can expand your revenue, right? You're just kind of punching the clock, going through the day, and it's boredom is the worst thing in the world. It's one of the reasons why I like the capital markets so much, because it's pretty rare that you're bored. You know, um, so I mean, actually, I should do a Substack on this. Like boredom, boredom is when people get bored, they start getting into trouble, right? They'll go to a massage parlor. They'll go to the bar and get loaded and go home with somebody, or they'll like drive 90 miles an hour. Like people find trouble when they're bored. You know what I mean? And I'm no different. I am absolutely the same way. Like if I have a couple hours where I don't have anything to do, I start thinking of ways to get in trouble. You know, so it boredom is the worst thing in the world. So maybe boredom is kind of analogous to maybe another word like just a stable environment or something like that. A stable, predictable environment. That's really where you can get into trouble.
And so, what's the antidote? How do you inject interesting ideas into that period of ennui?
If you have it's all about how you manage your time. We started this discussion talking about time management and all the things I do and how do I do all these things and stuff like that. Um, if you have, if you work 10 hours a day and you find that you have 2 or 3 hours every day that you're not really doing stuff, then come up with an idea, be creative, do something, take action to increase the top line, right? Like that's what I would do. So
Yeah, and certainly there's periods where we all have to do admin tasks that we find
Yep.
unpleasant. But a lot of times people settle into that because it's comfortable. And you talked about the Gen Z being risk averse. I see risk averse across generations now. I mean, I see G2, G3 boomers that own these companies that need to hand it off to G3 or G4 that recognize there needs to be some change, but there's this inertia that nobody can overcome where everyone's more concerned about preserving the status quo, even if that means eventually risking it just to avoid doing something that some people might laugh at or think is nuts.
Sorry, I had an ice cube.
So speaking of that idea of risk aversion, one of the other aspects that I often encounter with folks like this when we talk about content creation is they're worried. What are people going to think? What are people going to say? Well, we don't really know that. That's not our business. Well, companies like us don't talk about that, or people in our industry don't do that. So you've obviously had to reconcile the artist's desire to have others appreciate your work with your instinct to create what really resonates with you. Have you had periods of angst, or have you always just been self-confident enough that you didn't really give a shit what people said about it?
No, this is one of the things that I've been working on for 20 years, right? Like somebody said to me one time, you are not in charge of what other people think of you, right? And it's taken me decades to learn that. When Street Freak came out, my first book, the Amazon page is up and the reviews are coming in, and I remember the first time I saw a bad review, like there was this guy who he basically thought I was an idiot. He called me an incompetent bumpkin, and he said I would be like fetching donuts for the other traders on the floor.
This is a guy who ran the ETF program at Lehmen that he was talking about.
So I read this interview and like my heart's pounding and I'm like, oh my God, somebody on the internet doesn't like me. And over time you're just like, screw it. Like, I don't really care what people think. There was there was a review for the reviews for No Worries were awesome. Like there were 500 and something reviews, and one of them was bad. And it was a guy. He was listening to the audiobook and he had it on in his car. And in the introduction, I say how much money I make, right? And he was totally turned off and said that he's been a devout Republican, but they should raise taxes on me. Like, I mean, I just kind of laugh at it. I'm like, dude, you got triggered. Like, you absolutely got triggered. So but I don't. In terms of, from your standpoint, when you're talking about manufacturing firms and stuff like that and doing advertising or outreach or any kind of public relations, like I think this is an area where people really don't take risks. You know what I mean?
You could say, definitely. I mean, say that again. It's absolutely the case.
People don't take risks, but in order to stand out, you have to take risks.
Yeah, by
You know what I mean?
doing the same thing everyone else does, you just further commoditize yourself. There's no
Yep.
differentiation at all. You sound like every other person out there.
Yep. Yep.
All right. So speaking of how things sound, one time we were chatting at one of the Malden Economics Strategic Investment Conferences. I made some reference to your music and associating it with Ibithink and disco music, and you kind of looked at me and sneered a little bit. So, well, no, not really. So how do you categorize progressive house for folks that don't know instinctively what that means? What is it?
Well, house has a little in common with disco. But basically, house music is 4 to the floor, right? It's a 4/4 beat, and there's hi hats on the off beats. So you get the kick drum and the hi hat, right? That's house music. And there's all different genres of house music. There's like classic house and electro house and progressive house, and there's a whole bunch of different kinds. Progressive house tends to be more melodic, right? There's a melody, there's musicality to it, right? So, even a lot of pop music is kind of a derivative of progressive house. And there's people who make fun of progressive house because it's a little too mainstream, it's not underground enough, but it's kind of why I like it. It's a little more accessible. So,
Got it. One of the themes we started with was this question about not having enough time. I hear from so many business owners and business leaders that they don't have time to create content. They can't fight the writer's block. They don't want to be on camera. They're too shy. It's not how it's done in their industry. That's obviously not how it was done in the Coast Guard or in the finance world. Dalio's written a lot coming from a different place. David Solomon from Goldman does his DJ thing, but those are relatively uncommon. I think we've kind of danced around it a little bit, but do you have any specific advice, not just they embrace risk, but for the G3 or G4 leader of, say, $100 million industrial company who says, well, that's not the way it's done in our industry, do you have something pithy that you would kind of hit them between the eyes with that would help them suddenly sit back in their chair and realize that they need to be different?
Are you talking about from a PR standpoint, advertising, or just in general?
Well, I mean, I think primarily from a marketing and sales perspective, the product
Yeah.
roadmaps are pretty well built out and established based on what they've traditionally done. But from marketing and sales,
So this is kind of tangentially related, but it's about taking risk, right? And the Coast Guard is a big dumb government agency and it does dumb things. But the one thing that it does right is it empowers any person in the organization to communicate with the public, right? So their public affairs policy is if there's a reporter that comes up to you and you're in uniform and asks you a question, you are empowered to answer that question. Whether you're a seaman apprentice or a second class petty officer or a master chief or a lieutenant JG or a commander or an admiral, any rank in the organization, you are empowered to talk to that reporter, right? And by doing that, the Coast Guard says we are taking a risk, right? Like that somebody is going to fall flat in their face and say something stupid on the press. But the upside of that is the organization is very open, right? They're very open and they like to communicate with the public, right? So I think that's kind of the lesson here. Like, and it's funny because the other services don't do that. The
right?
Navy, the Army, they don't do that. Only the Coast Guard does that. So even like on TV here, I'll see an interview with like somebody at like the station in Georgetown or something like that, some 19-year-old kid, and they generally do a pretty good job, you know. So it's really about like as an organization empowering people to make decisions about how to communicate in a way that there's so much competition for attention out there. Like, how
Right.
do you get attention? You
Right.
know, so.
But of course, the leaders have to model it. The leaders can't say, "Oh, I'm too busy to do it," but everyone else should, find opportunities to post on their LinkedIn. Everyone's got to do it.
Yep.
I'm not a trader, and so I'll drive my headlights in trading topics. But I find value in reading the Daily Dirt app every day when it comes out. And I think there's two things about your approach that really help me as I think about business and my work with clients. Number one is your focus on sentiment and recognizing that at peak sentiment, the smart decision is often a contrarian one, but of course, when it's very hardest. And you're also quick to move on when you've been wrong, to not emotionally buy into some kind of a position, not to chase sunk costs, but rather to make an objective decision about where things stand and what the opportunity is. If you didn't have DMARC charts to read or your tools of the trade, in other words, again, going back to that industrial business owner, how can they overcome normalcy and recency bias in a way that isn't paranoid, but's realistic?
So you know who Derek Jeter is, obviously,
Mm-hmm.
right? So one of the interesting things about Derek Jeter was that he never really had a really bad slump. He had a couple slumps here and there, but not like a really. I mean, he played for 20 years. He never really had a slump where he was like 0 for 60 and just like for 2 months he didn't get a hit, right?
Right.
Like he never did that. And the reason that never happened to him was because he had no memory of the last at bat, whether it was successful or unsuccessful, positive or negative. As soon as it was over, it was in the past and it was no longer relevant, right? So, and you see athletes who they fail, 5 times in a row, 10 times in a row, 15 times in a row, and they're carrying the weight of that failure and it causes them to fail and it just turns into this reflexive process. Like Jeter just had no memory, like it's in the past, right? So that would be my advice. And I try to do that too. Like you have to do that as a trader as well,
Sure.
like just move on. I mean,
So the flip side is for companies coming off of 3 years of being at capacity, of having a backlog of 8 to 12 months selling capital equipment, just because nobody's had to sell anything since 2021. Everyone's just been buying everything that everyone could make. It sounds like the flip side is you also don't believe your own mythology, that you recognize that each deal, each year has to be won and fought for. And just because you've had a great run doesn't mean that continues automatically.
Yeah, I mean, even in my newsletter business, my best year was in 2021. I got an enormous amount of new business in 2021. That was the bubble year, right? That was the year of GameStop and AMC and
Right.
all this stuff. Like, I got a ton of new subscriptions. Hasn't been the same since. Like, it's just there are things that are outside of your control.
Right.
I could be tweeting 50 times a day and going on all these podcasts and getting all this publicity. It would not make a difference. There are just things that are out of your control, and you do the best you can, and that's all you can do.
Speaking of things out of your control, you talk periodically about your informal beige book of data. I think every business owner should have that. But it's tricky because it's, folks tend to live in their own bubble. So on the one hand, right now, I see restaurants that are full, lines out the door, but I see airport garages suddenly partially empty. How do you filter the data that's meaningful? Because as you said earlier, we're all overwhelmed with information.
So I have about 3,500 subscribers. People email me all the time. And I would say that, first of all, like, some of the people who email me have predictive power. Like, they have said things in the past. They have identified turning points that have turned out to be true, and they are pretty reliable as economic indicators.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? Then there's also a lot of noise, right? But even the noise is useful, because if all the noise is one direction, you're pretty much at an extreme. So, but yeah, like, the other thing that's a really big benefit for me is I don't live in New York, and in New York you get all this finance guy groupthink, and
Right.
everybody's in the same trade, and everybody has the same ideas. And I'm down here in South Carolina, and I have the only Bloomberg terminal in town. The only Bloomberg terminal. Like, there's no other finance jerks here. It's just me. So.
Right. When should you care about what others think?
Well, I think that I think you should care about what certain people think,
Okay.
right? We were talking about Morgan Housel earlier, right? Like, if Morgan Housel read No Worries and gave me some advice, I would probably take it, right? I would take advice from the guy that sold 6 million copies of a book.
Right.
Like, I think that would be a pretty good guy to take advice from. From some schmuck that's, inevitably what's going to, my book's coming out next week, and some schmuck, subscriber is going to be like, it was too dirty, it was too filthy, it was too raw, it was too this, it was too that. I don't really care what you think, sorry. But so I thank you for your opinion. I appreciate you writing in, but so look, like, if James Grant read the Daily Dirt app and said, I think you should do this with your newsletter, I mean, he probably has like 5 times as much revenue as I do.
Right.
Sure. Like, I would listen to James Grant, right? Like, those are the types of people you listen to.
So it's really evaluating the source before you evaluate the merit of the information.
Yeah.
Lots of writers say the key to success is just grinding it out every day. Lots of people have written about that. Pressfield kind of codified a lot of that common wisdom in The War of Art. Do you write every day? You talked about how you kind of write even when you're relaxing, but do you write every single day?
I do. So I probably write on average 3,000 to 5,000 words a day.
Really?
So, yeah.
Wow. And what percentage of that do you actually publish?
All of it eventually. Like, it all gets published eventually. So,
As you work on a new idea, like you talked about how you're writing this options course, do you just sit down and write it out, or do you, over the course of a year, capture ideas, frame out an outline, cogitate about how it's going to fit together, and then sit down to write it?
Nope, I pretty much just sit down and start on page 1 and start
Really?
typing. Yeah.
Do you work from an outline at all or not?
Only for the books. For the books, I will do an outline. Basically, just I'll do a chapter outline, but that's all that I do. So.
And when you sit down to start writing something like the options course, are you conscious of having in your head an outline, or you're just comfortable that your subject matter knowledge and your ability to produce the prose is going to let you produce something in the end that's worthwhile?
Oh yeah, that's it. Yeah.
So it's the confidence born of a lot of practice.
Yep.
You talked about after this you're going to get on the treadmill. Do you have a standard daily routine? Do you exercise every afternoon? Do you have times of day when your state of mind and energy are peaking or lagging?
Yeah. Usually I get on the treadmill at 2:20 every day, because 2:20 is when corn and beans and wheat close.
Got it.
And cotton. And sugar closes at 1. So all the agriculture closes at like 2:20 in the afternoon. And then I get on the treadmill, and then I come back into the office for like the last half hour of the day. But
So that's why we waited until 2:30 Eastern to record this today.
well, we scheduled this months ago. So that was actually before I was even in my treadmill routine.
Got it.
Yeah.
You had your time in the Coast Guard. You live in Myrtle Beach. But of all the things you write about yourself, I've never seen you write anything about spending time on the water.
I think the Coast Guard cured me of that.
Got it.
I get really, really seasick. Like I even when I was younger, but it's worse now. I get sick in the back of a cab. I get sick on a swing. I have the worst motion sickness of anybody I know.
Wow.
So it really was a big factor as to why I got out of the Coast Guard. I couldn't be a pilot. I couldn't be on a ship. Really, the only thing I could do was intel, and I loved intel. But like, if you weren't an operator, if you weren't driving ships or driving helicopters, like, you didn't really have a future in the organization. So that's a main reason why I got out.
Has your work on mental health and your management of risk and debt brought you to a point of stress equilibrium, or do you have to tap into some of your creativity to burn off stress, or is that what the treadmill does?
I guess I don't understand the question. Like, what do you
You got a lot going on. Do you ever get stressed out about it? Do you have to do something to burn it off?
No, I generally don't.
No?
I mean, really, like, I don't like exercising. I'm not an athlete. I don't like to work out. Like, it's annoying, and I feel better after I do it. But I just hate that I have to do it, and I just don't like it. Really, the big stress reliever is writing for me.
Got it.
Like, that's, from 7 o'clock at night till 10 o'clock at night when I got my laptop. Like, that's how I burn off stress.
What an amazing job you've done crafting your environment where what you do is also what helps you avoid stress. That's pretty cool.
Yeah, it is cool. It is cool.
Speaking of the writing, in your book, All the Evil of This World, you took an interesting approach. It's basically one 24-hour period from 7 different perspectives. How did you come up with the idea for that approach?
I came up with the idea for that when I was on the P-Coast exchange in San Francisco, when I was a clerk out there. And I was sitting there, and from my perspective on the floor, I would see a broker come into the pit. He would give a trade. All the market makers would fight over the trade. They would hedge with stock with their clerks. And that was the only piece that I could see. I couldn't see who was on the other end of the broker, who was calling the broker for the trade. Ultimately, that was a bank, which was coming from a trader who got the order from a sales trader who got the order from an execution trader at a hedge fund, which came from a portfolio manager at a hedge fund. And over the course of my career, I got to experience all those different roles and positions. So, I got the idea for the book when I was young, when I was like 25 years old. And then when I was at Lehmen and I got to really, see what the rest of the financial world was like, that's when I was able to write the book. So
I see. And you spent a long time, 5 years, I think, writing it, right?
Yeah.
So very different than your tempo for producing a book these days.
Yeah.
In the financial perspective, you talk sometimes about the perfect portfolio. That's got to be intriguing for anyone hearing this. Talk a bit about the premise of that.
You mean the awesome portfolio?
Awesome portfolio. That's it,
Yes.
right?
So, look, like the way we save for our retirement is stupid. It's beyond stupid. All right, we're going to take all our money and we're going to put it in the S&P 500 index fund, okay? And we're going to basically what we're telling people to do is what the Bitcoin people do. They say hodl, right? Hodl it. Like it goes up, goes down, goes up, goes down a lot. Bear market, down 30%, down 50%. Just hold on, keep putting money in, dollar cost averaging. It'll come back. The stock market always goes up. That is the dumbest thing in the world. It is the dumbest thing in the world. Like, it is very possible that someday the market will go down and it won't come back up. There's many precedents for that around the world, right? Like 15 years ago, Europe decoupled from the US. The US went up 500%. Europe's been flat for 15 years. Like, there is no rule that says that the stock market is going to go up forever. It doesn't have to. And there's no rule that it says it has to return 9% a year. It doesn't have to. So really the point of the awesome portfolio is to get exposure to 5 different asset classes. Okay. And what this is, it's the ultimate in diversification. So you have exposure to commodities, you have exposure to real estate, you have exposure to bonds, you have exposure to stocks, and there's a cash piece where you're getting interest on the cash and it acts as a volatility buffer to everything else. That portfolio returns about 1% less than the S&P 500 with about half the volatility. I don't get it. I don't understand why everybody isn't doing this.
Right.
I don't understand why I published that book and people didn't read this and say, "Oh my God, this is the greatest thing in the world." Like, because it is,
Right. So Night Moves coming out in a couple of weeks, and you're self-publishing this, whereas your other books have been commercially published.
Yep.
Collection of short stories. You shared with your Daily Dirt Nap subscribers this journey you went through, a long process of trying to get one of your short stories published in a literary magazine, and with no success. And you just kind of finally said, "Screw it, I'm going to self-publish." And I know you have some thoughts on the state of creative literature and fictional literature today, and kind of some of the societal things that are going on. But what led you to short stories, other than wanting to be the first person to publish one book in each of those 5 genres?
No, I mean, this is actually, I've wanted to do this since I was like 21 years old. Like, I had a writing class at the Coast Guard Academy, which was a very good class, and I had a very good professor. And we were reading all kinds of great stuff. And I wanted to write short stories back then. When I was 22, 23, I was buying literary magazines. Like, I wanted to get an MFA and write short stories. Like, it's what I've always wanted to do. So, this is like almost 30 years later, I'm finally getting around to doing it. And I would much rather read short stories than a novel.
Really?
Novels are hard. Yeah.
So you're writing 5,000 words a day. How much time do you spend reading?
I try. I spend so much time writing that I actually don't have a lot of time for reading. I do some reading. I do some reading from time to time. Usually, if I'm on a trip, I bring a book with me and I'll read on the plane or something like that. I try to read a little bit each day, but when you're writing 6 hours a day, it's kind of hard. So,
do you read physical copies of books or Kindle?
Yes. Yeah.
How about Audible?
Audible? Oh no, absolutely not. No.
What do you think is coming from a business cycle perspective?
I don't know. For a while I thought we would have a recession, and now I don't think we're going to have a recession. It seems like this is going to be a soft landing, I guess. The Fed is cutting, and they're probably going to cut too much. It's going to be a mistake. They're going to kick off inflation. The weird thing is that if you take out the pandemic, we have had one wave of the business cycle since 2008. Like if you take out the pandemic, we haven't had a recession in 16 years, which is incredible, absolutely incredible. And there's a lot of excesses out there that need to be purged and cleansed from the system. Recessions are good. Recessions are a cleansing process. Like, we really need to have one, except from the standpoint that I think that if we actually did have one and unemployment went to 7%, I think the political blowback would be so much. Then, yeah. So,
But I think from reading your stuff, you believe there's going to be another phase of higher inflation coming.
it seems that way. Yeah.
A lot of people are associating it or trying to relate it to the period in the 70s where there was inflation, it fell, and then it really took off with a vengeance. Do you think we're going to experience that?
So back then you had a bump in inflation in 1969. It was about 4 or 5%. And then it went back down. And then you had another bump of inflation around 73, 74, and it was about 8 or 9%. And the Fed raised rates in that cycle, and that tanked the stock market. The stock market was down 46%, one of the biggest bear markets of all time in 74. And then you had another wave of inflation, 79 to 81. They got up to about 14%. And you know what happened with Volcker after that. So if you think that we have one more wave of inflation coming, and the other thing is that inflation was not 9.1%. We calculate inflation very differently than we used to in the 80s. I mean, it was really around 17%. So if we get another wave of inflation, it's going to be ugly, But really, like, the whole point of being financially literate and being a trader is so you can profit from other people's mistakes, right? Policymakers' mistakes. If you didn't have government, there would be nothing to trade because, you're constantly you're trading off of policy mistakes, and that's really what this is.
But one of the things I don't want to, I'll let you make a pitch in a few minutes for how people subscribe and what they ought to know and how they buy your books and all that. But I would emphasize that I find real value. I mean, of course, sometimes I make some small scale trades off of some of the ideas you share. And I've got a portion of the portfolio that follows your strategic portfolio. But I find it really interesting to read the daily commentary just to challenge my thinking about business cycles and the economic environment and the market situation, by market writ large, not financial markets, that I think help me understand how to approach business with a broader perspective. And those intersections of ideas, I think, are really interesting. And I would encourage people to think about, your financial commentary, I think, has a high enough level perspective and enough breadth to it that it can challenge your thinking about business as well.
Yeah. I mean, look, I've been doing the Daily Dirt Nap for 16 years. It's my baby. You know what I mean? I love doing it. And, if I win the Mega Millions or the Powerball or something like that, I win like $300 million bucks. I'm still going to write that damn newsletter, because ultimately, if I had 300 million bucks, if writing it helps me more than it helps you, right? Because it helps crystallize my thoughts, it helps my process. So,
speaking of thoughts, what do you think people misunderstand about the value that veterans can bring to business?
Veterans. Well, yeah, I mean, I am a veteran. It's funny. I was actually thinking about putting on the Daily Dirt Nap website that this is a veteran-owned business, because it would just be like such a shock to people. Like most people don't really think of me as a veteran. I have long hair and I've got the earrings and I'm kind of a
But you're right about the Coast Guard frequently. I mean, do they not connect those dots?
Yeah. It's funny. I have ROTC students in my classes, and they're not always the smartest. In fact, usually they're not. But they show up to class 20 minutes early. They hand things in on time. They don't miss deadlines. They're super reliable. You can count on them. You know what I mean? And there's real value for having people like that. Not instead of somebody who's like, oh, my car broke down on the way to work, or oh, I had to bring my kid to the, like none of this BS. Just like somebody who's solid as a rock, who's going to be there every single day, and who's going to put in 100% all the time. That is a veteran. So
Yeah, I would also suggest that I think the decision-making ability that gets inculcated and trained, as well as a rational understanding of risk, willingness to take appropriate risk, I think it gets cultivated. People think of it as being a very kind of stifling environment, but I experienced it very differently. And I believe that often veterans have been trained in how to make those decisions and how to instinctively understand when it's appropriate to take some risk and how to manage it.
yeah, for sure.
You worked your radio show for several years, and then you pulled the plug on it. You now do, I think, as a guest,
Yep,
slot every week. But I
yep,
think you were every night on the radio for a couple of years, weren't you?
yep.
And then you pulled the plug. What advice do you have to balance persistence versus, just accepting the sunk costs and walking away? How do you make that decision?
It just became obvious after a while in that particular case. We were looking at a bunch of metrics. Were we selling any more products? Was our website traffic going up? Were we getting any discernible benefit out of this whatsoever? And meanwhile, we're sinking $250,000 a year into it. Like after 2 years, it just became obvious, and that was enough.
Got it.
So, um, the radio industry is, I mean, it's like a Model T. It's gonna go away. Like they're already getting rid of AM radios in cars. Like this business in 20 years is not going to exist.
Right.
So
All right. So I'm going to drop your website links, your SoundCloud links in the show notes. How do folks connect with you?
yeah. So if you want to reach out to me, you can either come through my author website, which is jareddillian.com. And there's a form there. You can reach out to me there. If you want to subscribe to the Daily Dirt Nap, go to dailydirtnap.com. There's a subscribe button. Hit the button and an email pops up. Email me. If you mention this podcast, I will give you a huge discount. Okay.
That's kind of you. Thank you.
So just mention the podcast. And the new book is called Night Moves. Night Moves is coming out in a week or less than that once this gets posted. And it's up on Amazon. You can pre-order the Kindle. The hard copy is going to be available Monday, the 23rd of September.
And is there an advantage to you for people to order from your website as opposed to from Amazon, or just go to Amazon and order it?
Just go to Amazon, yeah.
Okay. All right. So as we get ready to wrap this up, for somebody who creates content for a living and who enjoys doing so, kind of give us some closing advice for folks who think, I'm not a content creator. How should they start? How do they get in the habit? How do they build that muscle? And how do they come to enjoy it ultimately?
Man, you just gotta set a schedule. Like let's say you want to start a newsletter. Substack is great, right? So you start a Substack, and you want to populate it with like 20 or 30 people against their will. Just take people's emails and put it in there and just start sending it to them. Like don't even ask their permission. Then you write a piece. It's going to be painful. It's going to suck. Like writing your first piece is going to take you like 6 hours. It's going to be terrible. And then get somebody to look at it and edit it, right? Okay. Then you send it out. Then you set a reminder on your phone. Next week, this same time, you're going to do it again. Doesn't matter what you feel like a week from now. Doesn't matter if you're drunk or sad or tired or whatever. When next week rolls around, you have to do it again, no matter what. and you just keep doing it and doing it and doing it. And if you're good, then people will find you and you'll just develop this huge following. So
wonderful. It's been a terrific conversation. Thanks for investing some time in between the various commodities closing and your workout.
thank you.
So obviously a bit of a detour from our typical guest. I would love for folks to drop some comments in this episode, share your thoughts, and of course, like, share, and comment, and make sure you go into the show notes. I'll list Jared's various website URLs. You can subscribe to his SoundCloud if you're into Progressive House. You can order his book. You can subscribe to the free and or the paid newsletters, and support a veteran. Thanks very much for joining me and listening today.